If you've got more than $500,000 invested, there's a real chance you're working more than you actually need to. Not because you messed up, but because you haven't realized yet that your money has already started doing part of the work. Most people believe retirement only gets easier after hitting a specific number. 1 million, 2 million. But what really changes, the game happens earlier and almost no one knows how to spot it. In this video, you'll understand exactly what that moment is, how to tell if you've already reached it, and why ignoring it can cost you years of freedom even if you've got solid retirement savings, Social Security on track, and a strong investing for retirement strategy. Now pay close attention to this because this is where almost everyone gets it wrong without even realizing it. There are two forces controlling your retirement, and if the wrong one is still in charge today, you could be delaying your freedom by years, even if you're doing everything right. Worse, you won't even notice it happening. Now, let me show you something that honestly catches a lot of people off guard. Two people, basically at the same point, living completely different realities. Let's put names to this, because it makes it easier to see. On one side, Mark. On the other, Linda. Same age range, same level of discipline. Both avoided a bunch of retirement mistakes, but the way they live today couldn't be more different. Mark has around $800,000 invested. He did everything right. Avoided the classic 401k mistakes, contributed for years, but he still checks his app every day, still feels that constant tension. In his head, it's, this still isn't enough. I need more. Even with a solid level of retirement savings, he acts like he's still at the beginning. And that keeps him stuck making decisions based on fear. Now, Linda has something closer to $600,000, less money, technically further from the goal. But she structured her plan better. She understands how investing for retirement actually works. She's already estimated her future Social Security, adjusted her lifestyle, and realized she doesn't have to carry everything on her own anymore. Result? She sleeps better, even with less. Now think about this for a second. How does someone with less money feel more secure? The answer isn't the amount, it's where they are on the curve. Mark is still mentally in accumulation mode. Linda has already started the shift toward using her money with intention. And that shift completely changes the experience of how to retire. Because retirement isn't just about how much you have, it's about how well you understand what you've already built. If you don't recognize the moment when the system starts helping you, you keep living in survival mode. And then you make quiet mistakes, not because you don't have enough money, but because you don't realize you're not in the same stage anymore. And that raises an uncomfortable question. What if you're not behind, you're just reading the signals wrong? There's a reason even well-prepared people never feel like they've made it. And it's not a lack of money, it's the environment they learned retirement planning in. From the very beginning, everything revolves around, it's still not enough. More contributions, more caution, more worry. And over time, that turns into a mental pattern, almost automatic. You don't even notice it, but you're always operating in alert mode. Think about how many times you've heard things like, you need more, better play it safe, now's not the time to take risks. That helps. In the beginning, it keeps you from making a lot of retirement mistakes. But there comes a point where that mindset starts working against you. Because even when your foundation is already solid, you keep acting like everything is fragile. And there's another important piece here. There's an entire industry that grows on uncertainty. The more confusing how to retire feels, the more dependent you become. More reports, more projections, more complex scenarios. And in the middle of all that, something simple gets lost. You're not as far away as you think. That's why a lot of people with $700,000, $800,000, or even more still feel the same anxiety as someone with way less. Because the issue isn't the numbers, it's the reference point. If your benchmark is always the next million, you'll never feel like you've arrived. And that completely distorts your relationship with your retirement savings. What's even more interesting is that at this stage, your money is already working. But since no one taught you how to recognize that moment, you ignore that progress. You stay focused only on effort, not on the system. And because of that, you miss the chance to make smarter decisions, including things like Social Security and how much you actually need to keep working. And maybe this is the most important line so far. You're not behind. You've just been looking in the wrong place. If you strip everything down, retirement is controlled by two forces. That's it. Nothing more The first is your effort, how much you save, how much you invest, how well you avoid mistakes. The second is your money working on its own. And most people spend years focused only on the first one because in the beginning, they don't have a choice. Everything depends on them. Early on, it's basically 100% effort. You contribute to your 401k, avoid common 401k mistakes, pick solid investments, learn how investing for retirement works. Every dollar grows, but it's still too small to make a real impact. So you make up for that with discipline. More contributions, more consistency, more control, and that works up to a point. Then, almost without warning, something starts to shift. The growth of your money begins to show up. It's not dominant yet, but it's not irrelevant anymore. Maybe a good year in the market generates more than a few months of contributions, and that's the beginning of the transition. But like always, no one tells you this is happening. The problem is, mentally, you're still stuck in phase 1. Even when phase 2 has already started, you keep acting like everything depends on your effort. You still make decisions as if any mistake would be fatal. And that creates a gap between reality and behavior. A gap that costs you time, energy, and quality of life. This is where a lot of people get stuck because they don't realize that retirement planning evolves in stages. First, you build the system. Then, the system starts carrying you. But if you don't notice that shift, you keep trying to push something that's already moving. And when you combine that with bigger decisions, like when to use Social Security or when to slow down at work, that lack of clarity can get expensive. Not necessarily in money, but in years of freedom you could already be enjoying. And that leads straight to the point almost no one sees coming. The exact moment when those two forces start to balance out. There's a point where something shifts not in a dramatic way, but in a decisive one. And what's interesting is that almost no one notices when it happens. Up until now, you've been carrying everything with your own effort. But now, your money starts sharing the load. It's not full independence, not even close. But it's not full dependence anymore either. Let's put this into simple numbers. Imagine someone with $300,000 invested. In a decent year, that might grow by something like $15,000 to $20,000. If that person is contributing $20,000 a year, the game starts to even out. In other words, their effort isn't working alone anymore. The system has started to respond. Now take that a step further. Once you reach the $500,000 range or more, this effect speeds up. A good year might generate $25,000, $30,000 or more, and then something subtle happens. The growth starts competing with your own effort. And in some moments, it even surpasses it. That's the point where investing for retirement changes its nature. You're no longer the only engine. Your money starts working with you, not just for you in the future. But since this doesn't come with an alert, a milestone, or a congrats, most people just overlook it. And that leads to a classic mistake. They keep operating like they're still in the early stage. More pressure, more self-demand, more sacrifice than necessary. When in reality, the system is already carrying part of the weight. And that completely changes how you should think about retirement. The problem isn't failing to reach this point. It's reaching it and not realizing it. Because when you don't recognize the shift, you don't adjust your decision. And you keep spending energy like you're still doing this alone, even when you're not. And that leads directly to a simple experiment, a kind of mental test almost no one runs, but should. Now let's run a simple test, but an uncomfortable one. What if you stopped contributing today? Not forever, just as a mental experiment. What would actually happen to your future? Most people never run this calculation. And that's exactly where they miss one of the most important signals in retirement planning. Think about someone with $100,000 invested. If they stop contributing, the impact is huge. Growth alone won't carry much. At this stage, effort is still everything. Without contributions, the plan basically stalls. This is the phase where stopping is expensive and pushing forward makes total sense. Now look at someone with $400,000 or $500,000. If they pause contributions for a while, the impact isn't nearly as brutal. The money keeps growing, even without new contributions. Not at the same pace, of course, but it doesn't stop. And that's already a strong signal that something has changed. But since no one tests this, no one notices it, And here's the part almost nobody understands. Halfway in money is not halfway in effort. The first $100,000 is incredibly heavy. The next $400,000 feels different. And after that, the rules shift again. But if you treat every stage the same, you end up making decisions that don't match reality. This directly affects how you see how to retire. Because you keep thinking, I need to do more, even when the system has already started to work partially on its own. And that creates a kind of invisible fatigue. Not physical, mental, that constant feeling of never being close enough. Now, imagine making big decisions, like reducing your workload, adjusting investments, or planning your Social Security without knowing what stage you're actually in. You'll tend to lean toward excessive caution. And over time, that costs you years of freedom you could already be living. Not because you don't have enough money, but because you don't have clarity. And all of this leads straight to the most important point in this entire video. The exact moment when retirement truly starts to feel easier. Now we can finally say this clearly. The moment retirement starts getting easier isn't a fixed number. It's a condition, and it happens when your money starts carrying a meaningful part of your life on its own. Not everything, but enough to change the weight of your decisions. And this usually shows up earlier than most people expect. In practice, this moment tends to show up when the annual growth of your investments starts to represent somewhere between 50% and 70% of what you contribute. So if you're putting in $20,000 a year and your money starts growing $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 on its own, the game has changed. You're not building this alone anymore. Another way to look at it, maybe even clearer, is when your future income starts to feel mathematically on track. Between your retirement savings, investing for retirement, and your estimated Social Security, you can already see a predictable base forming. It's not full stability yet, but it's not total uncertainty either. And that middle ground is where the pressure starts to ease. And the most important part here isn't the exact number. It's the shift in your role. Before, you were the only one pushing everything forward. Now, the system is starting to respond with you. And that completely changes how you should be making decisions. From contributions to more strategic retirement moves. But here's the line almost no one says out loud. You're not carrying your retirement on your own anymore. And that alone is a massive shift because it means small mistakes are no longer fatal. And decisions don't have to be perfect all the time. The problem is, since this happens gradually, most people don't recognize the moment. There's no alert, no clear finish line, just a subtle feeling that things are getting lighter, and a lot of people completely ignore it. And that's exactly what creates the next problem. Because when you don't notice the shift, you keep living like nothing has changed. If this moment is so important, why does almost no one notice it? Because it doesn't come with any clear signal. No notification, no congrats, no emotional milestone. You don't wake up one day thinking, okay, now it's easy. It's actually the opposite. The change happens so gradually, it slips right past you. You keep doing the exact same things, still contributing, still checking your accounts, still being cautious. But little by little, the pressure starts to ease. Market swings don't scare you as much. A bad month doesn't feel like the plan is falling apart anymore. But since this happens slowly, you don't register it as a turning point. And here's the real problem. Your behavior doesn't catch up to your reality. Your money evolves, but your mindset stays stuck in the old phase. You're still making decisions like any mistake could be critical. Like everything's always on the edge of falling apart. Even when that's no longer true. This directly affects how you handle retirement planning. You stay overly conservative when you don't need to, or you keep working longer than necessary, or you delay important decisions like adjusting your investments or planning your Social Security, not because you lack resources, but because you lack awareness. And this is way more common than it seems. It's like driving with the parking brake slightly on. The car moves, you make progress, but never as efficiently as you could. And the weird part is, you don't even realize the brake is there because it's become your normal. And that slowly adds up over the years. Most people think the biggest risk is making bad choices. But at this stage, the biggest risk is not adjusting your behavior. It's playing an old game at a completely different moment. And that sets you up for a quiet cost. A kind of loss that doesn't show up in numbers, but shows up in real life. And that's exactly what we're about to explore next. Because ignoring this moment comes with a price, and it's usually a high one. The cost of not recognizing this moment doesn't show up in your balance. It shows up in the decisions you keep postponing, and most of all, in the way you keep living your life. Because in practice, you're still operating like you're at risk, even when a margin of safety is already forming. And that completely changes the direction of your life. Think about someone who could already slow down at work, but keeps the same pressure, the same workload, the same hours. Not because they need to, but because they think they do. Or someone who could start using part of their money more intentionally, but freezes, afraid of messing up the plan. That kind of quiet decision is one of the most expensive retirement mistakes there is. There are also people who avoid making any adjustments to their investments. They get stuck in old strategies, too conservative, sometimes even rigid, even when their current situation already allows for more flexibility. Deep down, it's not a lack of knowledge about investing for retirement. It's a lack of confidence in the stage they're in, and that keeps them locked in a constant defensive mode. This even affects big decisions like Social Security. A lot of people delay it unnecessarily or take it early out of fear, not because they ran a clear analysis, but because they still feel insecure. And that insecurity often doesn't reflect their current reality. It reflects an earlier phase that's already behind them. But since the mindset didn't change, the decision doesn't either. Now, here's maybe the most important part. You start solving a problem that doesn't exist at the same level anymore. You keep accumulating, protecting, worrying, when you could already be adjusting, optimizing, living better. And this isn't about becoming careless. It's about recognizing that the game has changed and you need to change with it. Because at the end of the day, retirement savings isn't just about getting there. It's about realizing when you're already closer than you think. And if you don't recognize that, you pay with something you can't get back. Time. Time spent on extra effort, extra worry, and less freedom than you could be having. And all of this points to one final shift, not in the numbers, but in how you see all of this. At the beginning of everything, retirement depends almost entirely on you. Your effort, your decisions, your discipline. Every mistake hits hard. Every good move matters. That's why avoiding retirement mistakes early on makes such a big difference. Because at that stage, you are the engine. Without you, nothing moves. But there comes a point where that starts to change. Not suddenly, but steadily. The system you built starts gaining traction. Your money begins to actually work inside your investing for retirement strategy. And little by little, you stop being the only source of progress. Now there's something pushing with you. This is where most people get it wrong. Because even with that progress, they keep acting like they're still at the beginning. More effort, more control, more worry than necessary. When in reality, the system is already carrying part of the weight, and that creates a life that feels heavier than it needs to be. Not because of a lack of money, but because of a lack of adjustment. The real shift isn't reaching full financial freedom. It's realizing you no longer rely only on effort to move forward. That your retirement planning is no longer fully manual. It's starting to build its own momentum. It's not automatic yet, but it's not fragile anymore either. And that difference changes everything. Because now, small decisions stop being critical. Market swings stop feeling like constant threats. And you start to gain something that doesn't show up on any spreadsheet: margin. Margin to make small mistakes, to adjust along the way, to breathe. And that completely redefines how you think about how to retire. And maybe the simplest way to sum all of this up is this. Retirement starts getting easier the moment you stop being the only engine. When the system starts carrying you even just a little, and if you truly recognize that moment, you stop living like someone who's still trying to get there and start living like someone who's already on the right path.